So today we're going to, James is going to give us a presentation on approach to ERP that he's developed over the years based on his experience. Quickly, the agenda, I'll just give a quick overview, like a couple of minutes, so we can get James into talking about what he's developed. Just a couple of things. James has a PhD in civil engineering, lived in South Africa till about 12 years ago when he moved to the UK, and he got introduced to ERP systems, I think it was 1987, if I remember correctly.
That's correct.
And then aside from doing a lot of ERP implementations, he's also been brought in to resolve or turn around failed implementations. So he's seen both sides of the equation, what goes wrong and what you need to do to get things to go right. His journey, I think, led him to apply the rigors of civil engineering to ERP implementations and develop the challenge, and address the challenges that are often encountered in ERP implementations. So he also led him to start the Institute of Business System Practitioners based on his experience, what he's seen and what he's seen missing. He can elaborate that if he wants to, but let's turn him over to talk about his way of addressing ERP implementations. So James, with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ted. Right, let me share. Right, can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Let me just get this working properly. So I've got a large body of information to share with you. This whole thing stretches to a 4-day intense course if you really want to go into it in depth. So I'm just going to fly at 20,000 feet and just touch the main headlines just to set a context for the discussion in half an hour's time. So just bear with me. I'm not going to take questions during this presentation. I'm going to go as quickly as I can, but hopefully you'll get the gist of what I'm saying. So let's put this in context. Google, Perplexity, Chat, GPT, etc. Query % of ERP implementations not deliver what was promised at the strategic executive level. 70%, 70%. Somebody reported a couple of days ago, 80%. I've heard a figure of up to 95%. And why is that happening? And that figure's been around for 20 plus years. Couple of success stories on my side: V3 Consulting Engineers, Cubic Business Model, audit efficiencies, massive management information, profitability improved, did it with one less bookkeeper. Another case, ASCO, so successful that they had to build a bigger distribution center, positioned as an industry leader in the management information and brand management, secured the Dior account, which is a very prestigious account in their field. So I'm coming from a base of where I know what success looks like. And then the context to that, I got into this, as Ted mentioned, I partially architected, project managed development of a system which became an ERP. In those days, we just called it a management information system, way back in '87. Went out on my own, spoke at conference about my success. CEOs coming up to me and saying, Dr. Robertson, we like what you say, but we don't have it. Please, can you help me? So I've investigated over the years in excess of 30 failed and suboptimal ERP installations and told clients how to turn them around. And sometimes I've helped turn them around, and in some cases been a full-blown new project. I've written a book, presented over 70 executive briefings and courses. I've interviewed over 100 executives and senior managers. I've done a number of full ERP projects which I've led with varying degrees of success over the years. And I consolidated my learnings last year into this ERP Accelerator, which is what I'm presenting to you now. Some experience. I started out fingers on the keyboard, programming, graphics, database, etc. way back. Hands-on hardware. I had hardware issues that I needed to resolve. And I've done a whole spectrum. The biggest client I've worked with was a SAP flagship site with around 60,000 employees. And I've worked with the whole spectrum of industries, the whole spectrum of ERPs. Some of my investigations have taken as long as 10 days with dozens of interviews. And the outcomes have ranged from scrapping to new procurement. And I've got a full procurement process. The reason I'm sharing all of this is that I think it's important that you understand that I'm coming to this from a very deep base of experience. And as Ted mentioned, I've come at it from a rather unusual angle as a civil engineer trained to prevent failure, saying, why is there failure? How do we prevent failure? And that's really what we're here to talk about today. Fundamental requirements for an ERP, my consolidated view, the answers to the questions I've not yet thought to ask enable me to run the business my way. And one of the things that I pick up in the industry is clients are getting upset because they can't run the business the way they want to run it, and implementers and vendors are getting upset with the client because the client's not doing what they're supposed to do. And there's a disconnect there, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. So what is the accelerator? It starts with diagnose the health of your present systems, putting in place executive custody, strategic alignment, then taking a decision whether you remediate or replace, something that I call precision configuration, and I'll explain that in a bit of detail in a few minutes. Prove it works, laboratory war games, really get it bedded down and thoroughly, properly configured and tested before you go live, a robust go live process leading to what I call thrive. And thrive is a situation where the organization is more efficient, more profitable, and more competitive and growing. And you can look back at the end of year one and say this ERP was worth implementing. And then underpinning all of that is this thing that I call an engineering approach. So let's go into the individual components. One of the key things that I've realized many years ago is that engineers don't design bridges to stand up, they design bridges not to fall down. And many of you will remember this incident in 2007, Minneapolis, 14 people killed. And the one thing that is absolutely certain that those people who died that day did not drive onto that bridge expecting to die, because bridges just don't fall down. And we look at a landmark, Golden Gate Bridge, San Francisco, 88 years old, probably stand another 100 years, because engineers designed it not to fall down and they maintain it not to fall down. What do I mean by engineering approach? Rigor and systematic method of working, precision, focus on preventing failure. And I'm going to harp on this thing of preventing failure. One of the big errors and one of the big weaknesses of the ERP industry is, and the IT industry generally, is that they focus on achieving success. They don't discuss failure. It's actually unacceptable in many situations for a member of the organization to put their hand up and say, I don't think that's going to work. I think this is a risk or whatever. It's viewed as being negative, and people tell you to, just to be positive. And no, you've got to focus on the factors causing failure, because if you eliminate failure, you will have success. So the process starts with diagnose. And here's a play on my doctorate and me being the ERP doctor, because I have diagnosed so many suboptimal ERP implementations. The executive level of diagnose, executive strategic decision support 37%, business intelligence and reporting agility 30%, ERP confidence, etc. The technical components 50% precision configuration, 14% executive custody, 10% strategic alignment, and so forth. So what do I mean by custody? The ERP is transverse and cross-cutting. It touches every facet of the business. The owner of that integrated, holistic view of the business is the Chief Executive Officer, and therefore only the Chief Executive Officer can be the custodian of the ERP. As you will see from this diagram, if you put the CFO or the COO or the CIO or the C whatever in charge of the ERP, they are biased. They have to operate with the other divisions by influence. It ends up with debate and discussion and public disagreements. It doesn't work. In all the investigations that I've done, just about none of them, the Chief Executive Officer was the custodian, and that was a major factor in the problems. The projects that I've done, a number of them where the CEO was the sponsor, the custodian, gone extremely well because of the leadership and the guidance that comes from the CEO. There's a catch. The CEO doesn't have the time or the knowledge to do the job. So you need to back the CEO up, certainly during the project, with somebody that I call the strategic project leader off to the side there. They're not an executive. They're an executive level person. They're an advisor to the CEO and an agent of the CEO. So they refer decisions up to the CEO, give the CEO advice, the CEO takes decisions, and the SPL communicates those decisions to the C-suite and the rest of the organization, and rides over the ERP implementation to make sure everything runs according to plan. A lot of talk about steering committees. I come across that continually, and quite frankly, if you found the steering committee in the cockpit of an aeroplane when you got on it, you'd get off it very, very quickly. I put a lot of emphasis on leadership. Why do I do that? Where I come from, we had military conscription. I rose to the rank of lieutenant colonel. I trained to brigade level, 5,000 all arms combatants, running a regiment of over 550 conscripts who didn't want to be there. The unit had a poor reputation when I took over, and I turned it around in 4 years with strong light touch visionary leadership to become a premium grade regiment. And so I learned firsthand what you can do with good leadership to totally change an organization. And that's why I put so much emphasis on leadership by the CEO of the ERP project. Bit of other context, my dad had a triple heart bypass. We're talking now 1981 when heart bypasses were relatively new stuff. He was on the table for 9 hours. He battled with his language for a year or more after that. And I was thrown in the deep end. He had clients like Union Bank of Switzerland. We had contacts in Credit Suisse and other major institutions. And we went to meetings, and he would basically introduce me, and I would take over his side of the meeting because he couldn't consistently communicate effectively. So I've been in the executive suite since 1981. I'm more comfortable talking to the CEO than I'm talking to the finance manager. And I had an interesting experience a few weeks ago. Somebody on LinkedIn was commenting on problems with an ERP implementation they'd been involved in. And I said, look, you need executive custody. You need the CEO to take charge. He said, James, most CEOs don't understand and they don't want to. I said, well, you need to educate them. He said, he said, well, what do I do if they won't? I said, well, you walk away because it's going to be a mess. And he said, well, if I did that, I wouldn't have any business. I said, okay, so what do I don't understand here? And then the penny dropped. I'm totally comfortable talking to a CEO, and the majority of practitioners are not. So we actually have got a session in 2 months' time. We were going to have a round table and get a number of senior practitioners together with myself facilitating. And we're going to have a discussion about what do you need to do in order to enroll the CEO as project custodian. And I really invite you to put that in your diary for the 21st of May on UK time. A couple of other things that came out of it. Managed to double turnover in 12 months, clever things with computers. And I learned a lot about economics and markets, which further informs my opinions. So let's talk about strategic alignment. First of all, what do we mean by strategy? What do I mean by strategy? Professor Malcolm MacDonald from Cranfield School of Management in the UK, strategy is doing the right things from the customer's perspective, and tactics is doing things right from the customer's perspective. If you do the right things well, your organization will thrive, and that's where my logo comes from. And my basic dictum is thrive by doing the right things well with ERP. MacDonald goes on to say, if you do the right things not so well, your business will survive. If you do the wrong things, it will die. And the better you get at doing the wrong things, the faster it will die. And I've seen some horrible cases with ERP. In one case, they brought me in too late to turn things around, and the company went bankrupt. In another case, the company was heading for bankruptcy, and I managed to turn it around at the 11th hour. So I have harsh, and that was, just by the way, that was JD Edwards and Deloitte. I have harsh experience of seeing how a badly implemented ERP can severely damage a business. So that's another reason why the CEO should be the custodian, because at the end of the day, if that project goes wrong, the CEO is going to be the one left holding the baby. The flip side of that is that if you do it really right and you produce a Thrive outcome, then the CEO will be the custodian of that outcome. So how do I define strategy? I researched further from McDonald, Michael Porter, Michel Robert, and I concluded that strategy is the essence of why the organization exists and how it thrives. It's a much more embracing definition of strategy. It's intuited, it's discovered, it's not invented, it virtually never changes. Strategy is a holistic, integrated picture of how the entire organization fits together and interoperates with the environment. It's generally one sentence. And if you get that right, the project will fly. If you get in the way of it, you'll cripple the business. So let's elaborate a bit on this thing of the essence. So the essential reason the organization exists, its core economic driver, how it uses people, how its market differentiate, core customer, etc. You need to have a holistic view of how that business succeeds, how it got to where it got today, how it has the money to invest in an ERP project. If you don't understand all of these things and you do not encapsulate them in the project design, you're setting yourself up for a suboptimal outcome. Strategic snapshots. One of the things I discovered way back was that there was a lack of effective strategic planning methods. So I developed this thing that I call a strategic snapshot, which gives you ultimately a weighted gap and allows you to focus on the 20% of activities that will deliver 80% of the value. One of the things that comes out of that is a numeric rating of the relative importance of critical factors. And you'll see the case there, the first item there, leadership. The first person says it's 31% of what's important. The sixth person says it's 8%. So we've got divergent views around the table, and those divergent views are real and they're legitimate because everybody comes to the mountain a different way. And if we look at installing an ERP as climbing a mountain and the objective is to get to the top of the mountain, the reality is that CEO, CFO, CMO, COO, CIO, HR all see the mountain differently. So if you don't do anything to measure that divergence, as I've just shown you, then everybody's pulling in different directions. You get these meetings that go nowhere because nobody can agree on the priorities. So what you do is the process that I've just touched on, and you agree one way up the mountain, one set of priorities. And that's an absolutely fundamental point of getting the project out on the right footing. One of the other outputs of that is what I call the strategic trajectory. Here we see a pretty mediocre ERP. Looking back 3 years, 4 out of 10. Today, 4.1 out of 10. If we keep going the way we're going, we might make it to 4.7 out of 10. But we want to be at 7, and we believe we can get to 7. So that gives us a strategic gap, which we can work to close. So everything that we're talking about here is tangible, measurable, actionable. If we look at the overall project approach, top-down strategy focused is what I'm advocating. And frankly, folks, I have to say to you, there is only one way to implement strategy, and that is from the top down. You've got to sit with the C-suite, determine what the strategy is, determine what the strategic priorities are, and then you've got to work that down through your project. If you do that, you will get strategic focus, which engages 20% of the effort to deliver 80% of the investment value. If you do it the conventional ERP way, starting with processes with mid-level managers and trying to work upwards, you're going to end up somewhere which is not going to be where you need to be at the heart of the essence of the business. And the result is you will employ 80% of the effort to deliver 20% of the value. And a huge reason why so many ERP projects do not deliver value is what's on the screen right now. So that brings us to decision. And I want you to notice that we are now on step 4 before we make a decision. So the decision is, do we replace, do we remediate, do we re-implement? The icebergs there give you some idea, my estimation of the relative cost. On the left, new ERP using the traditional approach, cost factor of 1. To the right, using the accelerator, 0.8, re-implementing with the accelerator, 0.6. But if you remediate, you're looking at about 0.05 to 0.4. It is much cheaper to remediate. And then to put that in context, I want to to find something that I call an IBIS, an Integrated Business Information System. And that's what you see on the screen. This diagram is about 20 years old. I've been talking about it for that long. And what you see is you have this whole mosaic of different systems and bits of technology, etc., that make up the way an organization manages data. You take that ERP out, you rip it out, and you destroy everything on that diagram. So to put in a new ERP, you have to rebuild everything that's on that diagram. Therefore, you need to be very, very circumspect about whether you replace your ERP versus you remediate. Going further, this is a rough list of all the things that get broken when you trash an ERP and all the things that you have to do to put in a new ERP. And so we're talking about the real cost of replacing an ERP is something like 5 to 10 times the budgeted cost. So again, if you're going to replace an ERP, you need to be very sure of your case. So I've talked about these icebergs a minute ago, just to reiterate, it's much cheaper to remediate. And that's a whole conversation. As I say, all of this, I could talk for ages. So let's talk about this thing that I call precision configuration. What exactly is it? It'll turbocharge any ERP, including what you've got. And in the context of what I shared a couple of minutes ago about strategic alignment, if you get the strategic alignment right, you're doing 20% of the work that will deliver 80% of the value. So if you've got an ERP that's implemented the traditional way, you've done 80% of the work to deliver 20% of the value, then just invest the remaining 20% of the work to deliver 80% of the value. This is based on an interview with the CEO of a FTSE 100 company, 60,000 employees, running a flagship SAP implementation. And I sat in the executive office of the CEO and I said, Neville, how would you rate SAP? He said, James, operationally, I'd give it 7 or 8 out of 10. The business is running well, but at a strategic executive level, I'd give it 1 out of 10. I have 4 senior accountants with teams of people working with them, spending 3 weeks a month in Excel because they can't get the information they need out of SAP and the data warehouse and business objects. And I'll show you with you in a minute why that was. I just want to take a sidestep here, a metaphor for precision configuration. So you've done well in life. You've got a really nice house. You've got a really nice front door. You need some screws for to mount the front door. So you go into a hardware store and you expect to find the screws neatly arranged in racks. So you go to the rack, get the screws you need and go and pay for them. But instead you find that the sales assistant says, I've got this drum of fasteners. I'll tip it out on the floor and here's John, our screw find consultant. He only charges $105 an hour. I'm sure he'll find the screws for you. You turn around and walk out and go to another store. But why do we put up with that when we're dealing with ERP? So what do I mean? This is the chart of accounts for that FTSE 100 company. There's absolutely no logic. There's no structure. Scraping, loading, dosing, ripping, and grading are a huge subject, and it doesn't belong in the chart of accounts. Medicines next to water treatment chemicals, explosives next to gas stores. Absolutely meaningless rubbish in a huge corporation that is spending a fortune on an army of people to unscramble this mess. This is what it should look like. This is a chart of accounts that I developed for a manufacturing company. And what you'll notice there is the hierarchical indents, the capital letters for structure, not for posting. The posting level accounts roughly about 7 items per category in the structure. And you'll notice the trailing periods in the codes, which mirror the index. That's a 10 out of 10 as far as I'm concerned. And what that allows you to do, this is filtering in Excel, but you can do it with any reporting tool. I'm filtering on the trailing periods in the code and double-click, drill down, double-click, drill down, double-click, drill down, double-click, drill down. And you can do that with any reporting tool. And what I want you to see is that is a huge improvement. And so we see on the left, the worst chart of accounts I've ever seen. Client went out of business before I could turn it around. On the right, another example of what I've just been talking about. To put that into context, the average ERP that I've seen is implemented in terms of this thing that I call precision configuration at the bottom left of this curve. If you push it right to a high level of precision, you unlock huge benefits. The ERP behaves differently, it seems differently, it's easier to use, you can produce reports quickly and easily. It's a different world, folks, and you need to see it to believe it. One of the things that allows you to do, and I touched on this with V3, the cubic business model, which gives you a very, very powerful way of looking at your data. And this is purely a code structure in the chart of accounts and in the dimensions. So then the next step is prove it works, a laboratory in war games. And that's just any room with some computers in. And what you do is you exercise the software in every possible way with every possible situation. What do I mean by a laboratory? An engineering laboratory is a place where you simulate the real world. Fundamental components, war games, break it till you can't break it any longer, specify workflow, cleanse master data, build up representative test data. Might be 0.01% of the total body of data, but it's every possible scenario, every unusual product, every unusual customer, carefully selected. Build a full portfolio of reports and business intelligence models, document standards, etc., and train every single user through war games. You would not put an unlicensed person in a 16-wheeler, 40-ton articulated lorry, give them a half-hour PowerPoint, drive them around a vacant parking lot for half an hour and send them out on the road. You'd kill people. Why do you do that when you train people to use an ERP? So then make it work. And what that looks like is the culmination is the CEO standing in front of the project team. And what you see in front of him is a pile of signed certificates which say, I, the undersigned, hereby certified that I have thoroughly evaluated and inspected all areas, And there's a clear understanding that this gentleman is going to be extremely unhappy if you've put your signature on that document and it turns out that you were mistaken. So you're talking about a tough decision. You do not go live until you are absolutely sure that it is going to run perfectly. And I see time after time after time reports of substandard ERP implementations where it is clear that what I'm just talking about was not done. They went live, it was not properly tested, they had weeks and weeks of hypercare, which is just another way of saying that the implementation was poorly handled. If you do it the way I'm talking about, you get a Thrive outcome. What do I mean by a Thrive outcome? Management of all facets of the business is tighter, the business is more lean and more agile. You have improved productivity, profitability, increased competitiveness and growth. And you look back after a year and say, this has really benefited us to put in this ERP. So recap, how do we do that? Diagnose, custody, align, decision, precision, prove it works, make it work, and thrive. All of that based on a foundation of an engineering approach. So we have eliminated failure and therefore we have achieved success. So to learn more, I have a 5-hour executive briefing, which is primarily targeted at client executives. So if you've got a client who you think would benefit, please feel free to nominate them. And I have a 4-day course, both for practitioners and for clients, where you will go into this in extreme depth. You'll get a complete document pack, job descriptions, charters, checklists, etc. And we can discuss favorable commercial arrangements. So that's my story. And next month, Jacob Bentsmed, who's a very mature, very experienced practitioner with some successful projects under his belt, is going to talk about his approach to phase 0 to get the project off on the right footing. So that's all from my side. Comments and questions?
I'll just, if I may, kick off with one question. So at one point, it was like, let's get best of breed. And then we went into, let's try and get everything in one system. And then over time, integration platforms got created. So we now have iPaaS solutions that allow, ideally, somebody to do almost plug and play. I can take out the ERP without disrupting other things. What's your take on that? I mean, do you think that we should try and get as much into one platform as possible? Or do you think it is of value to look at that from a different architectural perspective.
Ted, I'm going to stick my neck out on that one. I think we're at a break point, quite honestly, where we're going to move away from the big monolithic, all singing, all dancing SAP Oracle kind of scenario. And we're going to look more and more at what you've just described. The challenge has been up till now that the integration proves more difficult than it should be. And the reason it's more difficult is because of the lack of this thing that I call precision configuration. Precision configuration requires that every system in that mosaic that I described is configured precisely compatibly. And if you configure precisely compatibly, even if you're integrating by importing CSV files, it still is easy to do. The minute you've got inconsistent definitions in the different systems, they clash when you try and integrate them. And so having a monolithic system has tended to make that less likely to happen, but it's bypassing the real problem. And if you go the other, I had a discussion with somebody a couple of days ago, and they were asking about these, now you're getting these sort of big monolithic AI things and saying, well, should we have a portfolio of discrete purpose-focused AIs, or should we have one sort of omnibus AI? And I said, in my world, I was a keen do-it-yourselfer earlier in my life. And you would get these great big complex multifunction machines, but everybody went for the individual machines because then you could tailor your workshop to your exact requirements. My contention is that with AI, that's the case. You should rather go for a discrete set of small focused AIs that you can tune and test. And the point that I'm making, which is a long response to your question, is I think we are at a tipping point where we're going to find that with composable systems and what have you, we're going to move away from the monolithic systems. I think that SAP in particular are going to, I wouldn't buy SAP shares right now if I were you.
Okay. So if I understand correctly, and then I'll let others ask questions. What that means now is there's a greater, before, like you said, monolithic, okay, there's more room for error because everything's under one umbrella. Now, if I split all that out, then having that oversight, look at it from a more holistic approach, is critical, more critical than ever.
Doing what I've just described is vital to getting a really good result with a monolithic ERP, and it's 10 times more important if you're going to go the route that we've just talked about.
Okay, that's kind of what I thought. All right, thanks.
I have a question. Is what we're talking about here, this process, is this meant to be put forth as a standard or as a doctrine?
Christopher, basically, we're about to launch, and you should get notification within the next couple of days, a project within the IBSP to formulate an IBSP recommended best practice method.
So a doctrine.
Okay.
Okay.
What I've shared with you is my view of what that should look like. What we will do is over the next 2 months, we will enroll roughly 10 really senior key practitioners in the industry, get them on one call together, and we will go through that critical issues process that I touched on earlier at the Strat Snap, and we will formulate what is the overall arching framework for an approach to getting the best possible result out of an ERP, and for that matter, AI or any other business system.
Right.
My vision for that is once we've established that framework, that group plus a bigger group of people will take each of those points and will workshop them and collaborate to turn those into a fairly substantial document which says, on the considered collective wisdom of senior members of the Institute, this is what we think the best way of doing things is. And I'm hoping that by doing that, we will raise the standard. My vision for the IBSP is that in 5 years' time, A client who wants to implement an ERP or other major business system will only work with members of the IBSP who work according to the IBSP's standard methods of working.
That raises two questions, and I'll start with the one that should be simplest to ask. Within that pool of contributors to this best practice, how many are software engineers?
It'll be a complete mix.
Okay.
I envisage that it'll be put out to, first of all the members of the Institute. It'll then be put out. I've got about 360 active contacts on LinkedIn, specifically in this space. I will email all of them, and I will ask each one of you who are participating in it to distribute it to your networks. So I want to cast the net as wide as possible, get as many inputs as possible, and then we'll curate that to produce a document that has got some substance based on the wisdom. I'm a great believer, like that view of the mountain.
Yes.
You've got to get all the different views of the mountain. So you've got to have the software developers, you've got to have the consultants, you've got to have the this, you've got to have the that, and you've got to get all of those opinions around the room, and that out of that will lift out the best practice.
Because I would hate to be the only one there who has a visceral understanding of data architecture at the code level. But so that brings me to the second point, or second question. So I've been involved with, Bytecode Alliance, WebAssembly, the Internet Engineering Task Force, the World Wide Web Consortium, ICANN. The one thing that I've noticed from my involvement with all of those standards bodies is they cannot function. They can't even seed a proper idea if it is, well, they can't, coalesce around a proper idea or a standard or a doctrine or a best practice if it's seeded with an idea that has centralized authorship and is wrapped in a proprietary process framing.
Well, I think I'd like to think that what I've just outlined to you is going to overcome that objection.
Yeah, I think,
and that's the problem. Is it overcomes the objection because it has gravity, not necessarily because it has merit. You could be 100% right, but your position and the way you framed it is going to steamroll objections.
I don't see that.
I certainly hope I'm wrong.
Yeah, Christopher. So I think, just like there's the Association for Supply Chain Management, the Association for Quality Control, there's the Project Management Institute. So a lot of these were created because practitioners in the area saw that there were no standards. Like when you looked at project management, it could have been done any number of ways. And people said, this isn't right. Let's get together and figure out what we want to have as some standards to improve project management. And I think that's the whole intent here. I think, I don't know if James mentioned this, but the whole idea behind an IBSP practitioner is to drive measurable business outcomes. Now, the interesting thing is when I looked at ChatGPT and I was like, yeah, after James told me what he wanted to do, I figured, oh, there's got to be tons of other organizations doing this. And ChatGPT said, nope, there aren't. There's none of them are focused on driving measurable business outcomes.
Not one, and that's what got me here.
Yeah, that's the part that's exciting, and we just have to figure out, okay, how can we do that? We're not going to start telling SAP or Oracle how to implement their systems. They've got their methodology for implementing systems, but a lot of the challenges we see are on the business side of the house. And I think that's where we have to focus is how do we make sure the business transformation works so that the system is deployed effectively?
Yes. And I've been doing a lot of work to that end myself as well.
Okay. Well, good. That's why you're here. So,
and I wasn't here for the first meeting. So if it's okay with Dr. Robertson, I'd like to introduce myself.
Sure.
I am Christopher Gaither. I'm a United States Marine Corps veteran who spent 15 years in manufacturing engineering and got tired of business intelligence being too broken to actually, allow my employers to function. So what I did was I started looking into tools and tool composites that would fix that, and I couldn't find any combination that really got to the root of the problem, which was that core business entities do not share definitions across the enterprise. So I started building tooling to do that. I am a didactic diagnostician. I am a software engineer in addition to a mechanical engineer, and I am a person who thinks in structure and architecture. So what I bring to this organization is not only that, but also the ability to model any standards that can be encoded into a piece of software. So anything that this body comes up with that they feel like should be a part of a standard that they would like to see uh, part of the accreditation for a piece of software or for a vendor or for this and that, I can model it into software and show you, yes, this is possible. We've modeled the pain of implementation and decided that the benefits outweigh that pain.
Okay, thank you. That sounds good. Right, let's go around the room possibly and just get some comment. Bob, from your side.
Yeah, the thing that strikes me about this is in our first discussion we had was this custodianship issue. And to me, so far, that's the key differentiator, that how does the CEO establish custodianship versus leadership? And when I start thinking about that, I think of all the organizations that I've been involved with, and some run fantastic, I think, because they're transparent. They do, like you say, focus on strategy from the top down, that kind of thing. Other ones are extremely toxic, mainly because the CEO hires yes men, for example. The yes men don't take care of their employees. They're not interested in their employees' careers, all that stuff. So I guess what I would ask is, would this even work in a toxic type organization, or is that something that you would embrace with all of this thinking?
Bob, that's quite a question. You know, the immediate thought that I have in response to your point is that trying to implement an ERP in a toxic organization is at least fraught with difficulty and at worst nearly impossible.
Agreed.
You know, I place huge emphasis on teamwork.
Yeah.
I'm very, very focused on that diagram of the view of the mountain, of different views of the mountain. If you do not bring together all the views of the mountain so that nobody is excluded, to take Christopher's point, you're setting yourself up for at least a suboptimal outcome and potentially much worse. And so I've had a couple of discussions in the last couple of months with senior people around this fact that a lot of C-suite people do not know how to be a C-suite executive. People filter up through the organization because they're good at what they do, and one day they wake up in the C-suite. But nobody takes them on one side and says, look, by the way, you're now an executive. You need to think strategically. This is what strategy is. This is how you think strategically. You need to delegate. You need to do this. You need to do that. And builds up a training program which says, right, come away for a month and I'll teach you how to be an executive. So when you get back in the workplace, you've got the tools and the thinking to do your job properly. Because if, you know, and that piece that I talked about on the strategy side with the table with all the results and the different opinions, unless you have a method like that you can sit down with your C-suite and say, right, guys, first of all, do we agree what our overarching priorities are? Number two, can we agree one set of priorities for the whole enterprise? And can we then plan on the basis of that how we're going to go forward? You're going to continually have this. And if you've got a couple of strong characters, and particularly if the CEO is not taking full charge, they're going to butt heads. You're going to get toxic stuff. And that's just going to percolate down through the rest of the organization.
Yeah, I mean, there's different degrees of toxicity, obviously, but
Sure.
I would think if a CEO isn't or hasn't established or even thought about, I guess, this custodianship angle,
Mm.
he's opening the door for toxicity.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I know toxicity can be defined in all kinds
Sure.
of ways, but it's just a term that I've kind of glommed onto over the last few years. And
Bob,
yeah,
if I may, I'm just going to say there's two types of bad management. There's poor management, which companies have been proven to be able to survive. They can survive poor management because the people in the front line continue to do their jobs, and they realize what needs to get done, and the systems can help them. There's dictatorial bad management, and that they just kill the company. There's nothing you can do about it. So if you think BlackBerry, the founders in BlackBerry just said, we know best because we use our product. And so even when the iPhone came out, they just doubled down on it and killed BlackBerry. It used to be king of the hill. And then within months, it was out of business pretty much. So
Yeah.
that's, you can't save that kind of management, to your point.
yeah.
Jonathan, your thoughts?
Good afternoon, everybody. My first session with everybody, so I'm sort of feeling my way a little bit. However, let me jump in. A little biographical note. My background originally was broadcast television. I did 25 years in broadcast TV and engineering and operations. The reason I mention that is to Dr. Robertson's point about building bridges not to fall down. Traditionally in broadcast TV, excellence is the minimum required standard. We start at excellent and work up from there. So that was the culture that I started my career in. I've spent a lot of time in corporate IT. And one of the big things that I didn't spot is there's so many assumptions in corporate IT, particularly around why. Why is never specified. It's always assumed. So the language of IT is based on what and how. This is what we've got. This is how you use it. And the reason I call that out is the why plays very strongly into Dr. Robertson's points there about the custodianship and the leadership from the CEO. I feel that one of the most profound points you raised, from a selection of profound points, was you said, the requirements of an ERP are answers to the questions I've not yet thought to ask. Now, I think that's one of the highest callings of an ERP system. And I think that that's worth calling out because I think it's very important. In my career, I've worked with in technology services rather than in ERP guidance. But I've worked with many businesses where I've noted that the quality of management decision-making was very poor. And again, this got raised a moment ago. You get a lot of variations on, don't argue with me, I'm the boss. That's not the way we do it around here. What does everybody think? Brian's the smartest guy in the room. What does he think? And so on and so on and so on, right? And again, the root cause there was raised, which is comparatively few management teams get formal management development. They get a lack of formal management education. And so what you end up with is a board of subject matter experts first and professional managers second. And you're looking for that tipping point where they become professional managers first and subject matter experts second, because that's where strategic thinking comes in. Mm. Now, how does this play back into ERP? I would suggest, I've seen it once, I've still got the scars. I would suggest that one of the reasons for ERP failures is the fact that for all of its ability, a lot of the focus is on what and how, and there's a management education gap at the top that provides the why. Why are we doing all these things? Not why in the short term, but why in the strategic time frame. So I'll close off here. I'm enjoying the conversation very much. I've written a book about it, and yes. So one of the things that I'm most interested in, and I'll shut up in a minute, about the IBSP is my interest here is in management education. Right, I would not set myself up as an ERP consultant because I haven't got the mileage. But what I'm mostly interested in is teaching management teams to ask better questions, evidence-based decision making, in other words. So my question to the group is the IBSP, does it have a broad enough umbrella to incorporate the contributions from myself or people like me?
I would say so, Jonathan. I think the thing that excites me about what you just shared is I actually penciled in a task a couple of days ago, which is along the lines of it's an article that I plan to write, but it's along the lines of why the CEO is the only person who can save your ERP. And what you're saying is that you have a passion for educating people at that level to do their jobs. And inherent in those two organograms that I put on the screen is an implication, I suggest, that part of that role is probably going to turn into educating those people how to do their job, certainly as far as ERP is concerned. And because ERP is so far reaching, it's going to be that education is going to be more far reaching, if I can put it that way. Does that make sense?
It does, yes.
Jonathan, if I can just add to that, I think there's two things that we would be looking at. One is when we're looking at the system planning effort, we're going to be asking, where do you want to be in 3 years from now? How are you going to get there? What needs to be done? So now we have to get him to start thinking in those kind of terms. But also, to your point about evidence, I'll take data-driven decision-making as my approach for that, is that I've had clients tell me, I want to go in this direction, Ted, but the data didn't support that at all. So one of the things that we need to do, of course, is to make sure companies have the right business goals, or at the end of the day, you're just driving the train off the cliff. So we need to learn how to challenge that and get them thinking about what's the right set of goals to create. So that's part of, I think what we need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Ted, and that process that I just touched on works extremely well at getting a diverse group of people to reach agreement on the way forward and then develop their plans. And that's why I say you need to look at the strategic analysis and the strategic alignment before you even decide whether you're going to put in a new ERP. Because you may do that process and you may say, well, hang on, the reason the ERP is not delivering has got just about nothing to do with the technology. It's got everything to do with the way we're managing the business, to the way, speaking to Jonathan's point. Frank, are you there, or if you... he's not in his chair. Peter, would you like to comment?
Yeah, sure. Apologies, my camera is playing up. But the one thing that's coming to my mind is I'm wondering, I get from a strategic perspective why the CEO has to be the custodian of the ERP implementation or the whole ERP project. But are there ways that could be sort of democratized to sort of become something that is strategic for the whole business? Because in terms of workload, how does the CEO manage that in terms of running the daily on the ERP implementation?
I think we need to be clear. We're not saying that the CEO has to do all the work. The CEO is providing vision, guidance, and dispute resolution, which is the CEO's job.
Okay.
And that cascades down. So the CEO charters, commissions, empowers the C-suite. The C-suite do that to their direct reports. They do that to their direct reports. And that's why I made the point about leadership, and I made the point about my experience in 4 years as a military commander, was that I had a very light touch in the way I ran that regiment. I gave maximum authority and maximum empowerment. In fact, we set a new world record for a class 60, a 60-ton assault river crossing bridge with a team of people that only had a captain and a couple of mid-rank NCOs running it, because they were so empowered to exercise their own initiative and to get the job done. And that's my vision. Don't hear me say that the CEO is now going to take on an onerous workload. And that's one reason why I say you need the strategic project leader alongside the CEO. Frank, from your
Thanks
side.
for clarifying that. All right.
Hi, everyone. Thanks. I had to step away for a minute. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Just real quick introduction. I know we're coming up on the time here, but I'm Frank Scavo, and I just had wrapped up a 50-year career in enterprise IT, and of which 40 of those years was as a consultant, both an independent consultant and working for a systems integrator, and then founding my own management consulting firm focused largely on enterprise software. So during that time, and Bob worked with me there for the past 15, 20 years, whatever. So one of the strong philosophies that I carried into that was this concept of being a management consultant needs to be absolutely independent of software, hardware, technology providers. And that's something I've written a lot about, don't see a lot of in the industry. And I think that is a major problem that I'm hoping this group can address that. The methodology, James, that you laid out there, you went pretty quickly through it. I did my best to keep up. I can see why that needs to be an all-day or a 4-day session. But the broad outlines, I totally agree with. Especially, I was very happy to see, I forget what you called it, you had the step called, these are my terms, but I think you use the same ones, remediate, upgrade, or replace.
Yes.
What to do with the existing system. And that's something that I always addressed in my consulting with clients on ERP selection. And I said the selection is not, that selection almost assumes you're going to make a decision to change systems. And most consultants do not address that because they come in with relationships to software technology providers. So they come in assuming that this is going to be an SAP project, or this is going to be an Oracle project, or if it's an existing Oracle install base, they assume it's going to be an upgrade or remediation in some way. So they come in with a preconception on what they're going to do there. And also, I have noticed that in many cases, the client itself is biased.
Yes.
And I've come into situations where we hate our existing system and we're going to replace it. No, we're not going to don't even talk about keeping our existing system. We hate the system, right? Where in fact, there's nothing wrong with the system.
Correct.
Or what is wrong with the system can be remediated. They either need to do an upgrade or they need to address some, process issues or how they implemented it and so on. And so even the clients are biased. And I think that's very important to address early in the project and not have a decision already made when you come in to a client like that. So I'll just leave that at that. I have some other thoughts and ideas, but let me just leave it at that right now.
Thanks, Frank.
Oh, I should mention I actually retired in 2024. I'm still interested in staying up with the industry. I do maintain a Substack called the Enterprise Spectator. If you want to look me up on Substack, where I'm still covering the industry and sharing lessons learned from my long career that I think have lessons that are still applicable today. So I'm still.
I'm certainly hoping that we're going to see a lot of you in this project, since you're going to have the time to get involved.
We'll see. I have other interests in retirement as well, so we'll see what we can do.
Right, chime in on Frank. Frank is still writing actively, and he has a real good way of putting things and writing things transparently and just funneling all his experience into things. They're a joy to read, so I encourage you guys to
Thanks,
read some
Bob.
of this stuff.
Is it Marit Yunjai? Your camera's off.
Hey,
Hi, have you got any
hi,
thoughts?
hi, James, and hi, everyone. So sorry, my camera is basically not working, so I really am sorry for that. But yeah, next time I will try to make it. I will try to connect it. This is my first time, and warm greetings from Hamburg. So I'm connected with James. Basically, I read his emails and find them quite, I would say, insightful. And I thought that yes, it would be really of use to me that I joined this meeting, and I'm really happy. Has been quite, I would say, insightful. Going maybe for your next connections, James, I would request you. I also have written your message that I would like you to talk more about why a CIO cannot take that custodian role, because still I'm not convinced that it should be CEO. I understand it, yes, but given the current digital space, there are going to be some breakthroughs, and one of them which I can advocate for is that CIO should be the custodian, not the CEO. Otherwise, the CIO, I personally feel, this is my opinion, that then he is not of useful to the organization. So I would request you that yes, if you talk more about this in your next lecture, that would really be helpful. And thank you, everyone.
Folks, we're out of time, but let me just steal a minute and just respond quickly. The issue with the CIO is not that the CIO becomes redundant. The thing to realize is we're talking about a business project. We're not talking about a technology project. If you look carefully at what I had to say earlier, there's nothing in there about technology. It's all about business. It's about leadership. It's about management. It's about strategy. It's about change. It's about teaching people. It's about thoroughness, etc. That's not the CIO's domain. An ERP implementation is not a technology project. It is a business strategy project, and therefore it must sit with the CEO. The CIO doesn't have the ambit, the perspective, or the background to handle what needs to be done by finance, needs to be done by operations. Yes, I will grant you that you get CIOs who are strategically inclined and have got good relationships and can do a pretty fair job. But in my experience, just about every time I've encountered that, I've had to go back to the client and say, to the CEO, because I always start with the CEO, you need to take on personal responsibility for this project. Folks, I'm glad everyone's had a moment to talk. We're 2 minutes over time. Before we sign off, is there any last comments or thoughts before we close this meeting?
Just one from me. One of the things I particularly have seen through really well-managed organizations is passionate employees and the amount of productivity you get from those types of people. And as a manager, I've seen that if I'm interested in their careers and giving them things and training and whatever that aligns with the strategy of the company, but also aligns with their careers, they love it. They're passionate. They work hard. I didn't see passionate employees or an inkling of that in your benefits of thriving. And I would love to see that, because I would think that a CEO would love to have passionate employees.
Point taken. Thank you.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, I think it's time to end. Ted, could you stay on for a sec afterwards?
Sure.
And everyone, Bob, Frank, Peter, and Ted, look forward to seeing you at the end of the month.
Absolutely.
Christopher, I will certainly make sure you're kept in contact, and I'll be very happy for you to participate in the session in a couple of months' time, where we start looking at developing a good platform of recommended practice. Folks, thank you so much.
Excellent. Nice meeting all of you.
Thank you, everyone.